The evolution of this system was partially a defensive measure on the part of the chief controller and his deputies, because at first there were not enough such direct phones. And the ops room during a busy mission was a bit like Piccadilly Circus on a VE day. It took literally months to perfect this system of information, to the point where every bomber and fighter unit reported in at every CP. There were months when almost weekly the 65th Fighter Wing would needle one or another of the bomb divisions, gradually convincing them of the necessity. Fighting group leaders were supposed to say, "Ha ha ha," on the radio when they crossed the enemy coast, but they, too, had to be jogged up from time to time. It did not take long for everyone in the 8th Air Force to realize that Control Room had Saffron Walden knew more about what was happening on the missions than any other agency, and an increasing number of phone calls from higher and adjacent headquarters began to be a considerable burden to the chief controller. This led to the establishment late in 1943 of the permanent conference line connecting Saffron Walden with Pine Tree, Headquarters 8th Air Force, Ajax, Headquarters 8 Fighter Command, and later on, the other wing control rooms. Pine Tree then set up a similar conference with the 3 bomb divisions, and for the first time Control had a reasonable chance of getting the information it needed at the time it was needed. Saffron also, because of this, became at once the natural connecting link between the American control system and the RAF. Direct lines connecting the ops room with the RAF numbers 11 and 12 groups permitted instant exchange of information on locations of aircraft, so as to minimize the danger of encounter with friendly formations or of having our own airplane shot down by the British ground defenses. Later on, liaison with number 12 group was shifted to the 67th Wing at Walcott Hall for convenience of communications. 2. Use of Y service. Although the very extensive monitoring service established by the RAF to intercept German R/T and W/T was primarily intended to disclose what the enemy was doing, strangely enough, its greatest value to the Americans for a long time was to help keep track of our own aircraft. Through this extent, this ties in with one above. The British has used the Y, a super-secret and extremely efficient service, chiefly to augment early warning radar in giving the tip-of on what the Jerrys were up to in their raids against Britain. The fragmentary messages, translated and intercepted by experts, were telephoned on a broadcast circuit to all users and usually appeared before the controller as scribbled lines on small slips of papers, showing always the exact time of the enemy transmission and the place if known. Controllers using Y always had to be very careful in what they said to their aircraft, because they had to make it sound as though all warnings were based on radar plots and other standard information that Germans were familiar with. Every precaution was taken to prevent the enemy from realizing how much good we were getting out of his pilots' radio chatter and D-controllers' messages. For once realizing it, he would be moved to do something about it, either by enforcing stricter R/T discipline, by changing his codes oftener, or by some technical improvement in his radio. In July 1943, when the 65th Fighter Wing had begun dickering for permission to receive and use the Y service, no one dreamed how very much the Germans were destined to contribute to the success of long-range control. Thanks largely to the efforts of Colonel Larry Callahan of Ajax, the servers were laid on, and soon came a pleasant surprise. The Germans were obligingly giving us a most detailed running commentary on the positions of our bombers and fighters over Reich territory. As a part of their control system, they were putting out this information for the benefit of their own control organization, flak defenses, and fighter pilots, and in order to get it around to all the fields and simultaneously to any fighter airborne, they were transmitting it by radio. Probably they reasoned that we certainly knew we were anyway, and it couldn't therefore do them any harm, if they had only known. The controller at Saffron or rather his Y staff officer was able to take the Y messages as they came in and plot a variable reasonable core for almost every bomber formation and every fighter group. And it was not until almost the end of the war that it became evident the Germans had caught on and were appearing to put out false information. For nearly 2 years, the Y reports were generally considered quite reliable, and in fact, sometimes proved our own navigators in error in the positions they reported. On the enemy's own fighter operations, the Y service was often equally informative, if one knew how to interpret properly the rather fragmentary evidence of activity. This knowledge came from study, and the Wing Intelligence Section worked hand in glove with the control staff in perfecting the technique. Certain A2 officers specialized in the work and shared the duty of assisting the chief controller at the Y position during missions. It was Squadron Leader Patty Hides, RAF Operations Liaison Officer, who showed the way. However, his long background of matching wits with the German controllers as an RAF controller at Malta and Debden had given him an almost intuitive understanding of what Jerry was likely to do in a given set of circumstances. At Saffron, he tutored the succession of chief controllers so that they too began to be wise in sizing up what might be happening at any moment of a mission over Germany. Hyde spent long hours going over the intelligence reports of the 8th, the 15th, the RAF, and the Russians, and he developed a series of informative teletype bulletins under the heading Jerry Gen, Gen being the RAF term for information, in which he predicted accurately many changes in German strategy and tactics. Out of these studies and the Y service work on missions, he was able to draw up a map on hostile reaction, which showed in bold and simplified form what Jerry was up to in various areas. This was reproduced and kept up to date in each fighter group and in the controller's reading room. This furnished a common background or starting point among group leaders and wing controllers to work out a good operational control system on Channel A, and a valuable basis for pilots to study the enemy they were fighting. Although a byproduct of control, all this work contributed to, and in fact was a necessary prelude to, full and intelligent use of the Y service on the control dais. Having in hand the T-plots, plus a clear picture of the progress of the mission, the controller was able to judge fairly shrewdly the areas of hostile reaction, and to rearrange his escort defenses if necessary. So it really was true that the scraps of paper with their cryptic messages, the Perspex-covered map with its vari-colored grease pencil marks, these things formed the key to strategic control for more than a year, when there was no other way. And by far the most satisfying messages that came through the Y were the ones quoting the alarmed outbursts of German pilots. Achtung, Trunkenbolden! After control had steered a roving squadron of thunderbolts towards the hostile fighters. 3. Radio relays. It is quite obvious that all control might do in developing information will be futile unless radio contact could be maintained with both fighters and bombers. And in fact, the very gathering of information on routes and timings depended on this same contact. At the start of things in the summer of 1943, the Saffron Control Center had A. its local transmitter and receiver plus, B. forward relay stations out on the English coast, connected to the ops room by landlines. By switching from one to another of these facilities as atmospheric changes occurred, control was able to maintain fairly satisfactory contact up to about 225 miles. But this was no good for missions into Germany. It would not even cover missions as far as the Ruhr. The first airborne relays were fighters, used merely to keep in touch with their own groups. 1 or 2 such aircrafts would be detailed to patrol in a set area midway between England and the escort area, and the pilots would repeat back and forth all messages received from either end. The reason this was necessary is that VHF is good only line of sight, i.e. its range is limited by the curve in the Earth's surface, something which is not true of longer radio waves. This plan was all very well, But still, control had to depend on getting information from the bombers through the time-consuming process of having it sent in code to the bomber bases, then relayed by telephone to Saffron. Or, on some occasions, messages from bombers could be passed on C channel to nearby fighters, then passed to Saffron through the fighter relays. It seemed best to provide a C channel relay that could pick up all the conversation among bomber and fighter units, sort out the facts needed by control, and pass them directly to Saffron. And thus was born the idea for the bomber relay aircraft that later became an essential part of every 8th Air Force mission. It took a bomber-type aircraft to carry the equipment needed, and a B-17 was assigned to the wing for the purpose. Later, when the wing was assigned to the 2nd Air Division, a B-24 was used. The development of a successful airborne radio relay was an epical signal achievement because here again there was no precedent. At first, the relay provided only one channel, using a BC-640 ground-type transmitter and a BC-624 receiver, part of the SCR 522. An operator in the bomber simply listened in and repeated what he heard. Then Master Sergeant John Major of the 52nd Fighter Control Squadron and other technicians went to work on the idea of making the relay automatic, and that is the way it worked at war's end. Though controller would broadcast on one frequency, a receiver in a relay airplane would switch on the BC-640 and transmit on another frequency to the bombers and fighters. A second receiver-transmitter combination reversed the process, relaying to the controller on the special frequency all the traffic of the regular C channel. The relay bomber was dispatched by wing field order to a patrol area and altitude determined to be best for the control of that day's mission. Normally, this was somewhere over the North Sea. After 1 or 2 precarious ventures, it was not sent over hostile territory. After the relay became an established institution, its use was expanded by the installation of 6 SCR 522 sets, so that the operational frequencies, the channels, of up to 6 fighter groups could also have relay service. This was provided by 3 controllers riding in the relay ship, each handling 2 channels. Even without airborne relay communications, people have been able to achieve remarkable success in extending control range, considering what hitherto had been regarded as the limits of VHF. They did this chiefly through intelligent use of the forward relay ground stations, connected by telephone with Saffron Walden. A communications officer was always on guard in a control room, ready to shift a control position from one line to another to get better reception. The stations were maintained at top efficiency. The British GPO, equivalent of the American Bell system, was kept busy working on the lines and other telephone equipment to keep performance up to snuff. The signal people, in other words, accepted the challenge of a war which demanded that the controller sitting in England should converse with a pilot flying over Berlin. And by patience and deviousness, they figured out how it could be done. And it was done more than once. Not as a regular thing could control work that far, but the performance was certainly much better than anyone had dared to hope to get. See chart on next page. So that's the way control regained sight in 1943 to 44. Good timing, smart use of the Y service, excellent communications, complete coordination through a single chief controller. That, of course, is putting the story in a very small nutshell. A few excerpts from control reports may serve to further illustrate the progress made. Here are some taken at random. October 20th, 43. How really good the controller's information sometimes can be was used illustrated in this mission as follows. At 14:01 command, the 355th was told the bombers' 2nd Task Force would be along in a minute or two. At 14:02, 355th reported on R/T being in position, and that bombers were being attacked. At 1,403 calls from bombers on Channel C were heard, stating they were being attacked in front and asking for help. R/T from 355th at this moment indicated they were already aware of. This and were taking action. At the same time, a Y message was received stating that the Hun fighters were attacking from the front. And information from the bomber units after the mission indicates that the 2 forts lost by this task force were in the low group, attacked from the front by enemy aircraft in line abreast, making one pass at 14:03. The scheduled R/V time of the 355th was 14:03, and the group states that at that time the bombers were approximately 8 miles west of the R/V point being attacked. And of course the attack ceased as the P-47s approached. The Spit escort had already disappeared. June 14th, 44C channel. R/T coverage was complete throughout the entire mission. All 7 task forces reported their times and positions. Traffic was very heavy, but exceptionally regular. Both fighters and bombers used this channel to good advantage in today's mission to effect rendezvous. Several stragglers were contacted and escorted by fighters from the enemy to the English coast. One bomber, unable to give a transmission on his air/sea rescue channel, was picked up by Daily 63 and guided from the French coast to a landing strip in southern England. June 25th, 44C channel. The bombers supplied us with very good information on their course and timings on this mission. By keeping in contact with us and the fighters throughout the mission, several stragglers were picked up almost immediately after they left the formation. We made contact with all combat wings during the mission. February 14th, 45 1 Air Division, C channel, while both Balance fighter and Vine Grove bomber. Messages came in loud and clear. It seemed that they had difficulty receiving each other, so most messages were relayed from here. January 22nd, 45C channel. All Vine Groves that called in timings at CP1 were running from on time to 1 minute late. At CP2 timings were from on time to 4 minutes late. Most groups called in their timings, and they were very prompt in answering Balance aircraft asking for their timings and position. It was reported that Vine Grove 18 had been scrubbed from the mission, but timing from this group were received at control points 1 and 2. Balance 14, who had been informed that Vine Grove 18 was scrubbed, was informed on a channel that Vine Grove 18 was continuing on the mission.